May first of all recognize our political leader, Honorable Alan Chastanet, who's also the leader of the opposition and MP for the great constituency of Micoud South. Welcome, sir, and pleasure to be here with you, and good to see such a great showing by members of the media. We feel that it's necessary to come to speak to you, the people of St. Lucia, today. Haven't seen the government presented its second estimates of revenues and expenditure. It really is an endorsement of the United Workers' Party policies. It really is an endorsement of all the things that we were doing to rebuild this economy from COVID. The Labour Party wants to make you believe that it's having such a difficult time in the management of this economy because of the global inflation that is taking place. In fact, they have falsely made a comparison between the economic fallout that afflicted the country because of the global pandemic, which the United Workers' Party had to administer, and the inflation issue that is gripping the world right now. Let me disabuse your minds to say to you that there could be no comparison between COVID-19 and the global inflation problem. In fact, when you look at the assessment by major organizations like the IMF and all the leading economists of the world, they'll tell you that not the world financial crisis, not the Gulf War, none of those crises that we have had a more debilitating impact than COVID-19. In fact, the only crisis that they have seen in the last 100 years that can compare is the Great Depression of the 1930s. So what we're dealing with during COVID, in the height of the pandemic, was the greatest economic crisis the whole world has seen in 100 years. And that is since the Great Depression of the 1930s.
And the World Wars.
And the World Wars, of course. And of course now, St. Lucia, a small island economy that depends on the global economic situation. You hear this government crying now about the Ukraine war. Everything is the Ukraine war. And Russia and Ukraine and oil prices and energy prices. All of that is true. But it just does not compare to what the United Workers' Party administration had to deal with COVID-19, which resulted in a significant drop in economic performance of the country. The GDP of the country, or the total economic output, went from 5 billion to 4 billion. So the country lost over $1 billion in economic activity. That meant that you lost thousands of jobs. In the tourism sector alone, there were 15,000 people who lost their jobs and who went home on the breadline. I remember that given day. We were getting ready in the year 2020. We had 3 wonderful months. And when we learned that the virus had come to the island and we had some cases, the government then took very drastic action to ensure that we curtail any spread that there was. It meant that we had to shut our economy down. It meant that the borders were closed in our country. It meant that there were no tourists, there were no planes flying to St. Lucia. But through all of this, with prudent and wise fiscal management, we got through this difficult situation where you see that the revenues of the country, the taxes as a result of tourists coming through the airports, as a result of their consumption while they're on the island, as a result of the consumption of the employees of the tourism industry, as a result of the electricity consumption of the hotels, and that whole value chain was lost in the country. And the impact is immeasurable that we would have seen in our economy. We still paid our bills on time. Civil servants were paid. We still ensure that we paid our debt obligation. We're not crying. Whenever bonds became due, St. Lucia never defaulted on its debt in that very difficult economic circumstance. The taxes of the country fell by $500 million at that time. That's the revenue loss of the country. This administration is now presiding over the most taxes that any administration has ever picked up in the history of government. And they are making excuses as to why they can't make sure that gas prices are stable, as to why they can't ensure that cooking gas remains at an affordable rate for the people of St. Lucia, as to why they can't ensure that the price of bread, a simple commodity, remains stable, as to why they can't ensure that the electricity bill of people in the country can remain stable, as to why they can't save the population from increases in bus fares, as to why they can't ensure that they save the manufacturing sector from increased costs as a result of them picking up all of these taxes. We see that there's over $123 million in new taxes in the last fiscal year. The Philip J. Pierre economics or fiscal policy has dug its hands deep into our pockets, despite the fact that we are facing these rising global prices, and they did absolutely nothing to save us from the economic situation and the economic shocks which came about as a result of the global inflation problem. But let's compare that to what we did in the worst of times. We provided income support for 11,000 people who are registered with the NIC. We ensure that those people who are not registered, like vendors and taxi drivers and bar owners and people who had little restaurants and people who were vending on the beach, or small business persons, hairdressers, barbershops, and you can go down the line of self-employed persons. Even though they weren't registered with the NIC, we went and we sourced monies so that those individuals in a very difficult time can get the assistance from our social assistance because of the great economic fallout which happened at that time. We went as far as ensuring that there was support for thousands of families in our electricity bill support system. We ensured that the farmers of this country receive fertilizers and inputs like seeds to help them to rebuild their farms and to increase production. And we guaranteed the market everything they provided. The government then bought it back through the marketing board, and the supplies went to the vulnerable families of this country. We ensured that food was available to disabled groups and other vulnerable groups in our community. The Labour Party has collected the most taxes in the history of the country, but yet you want to cry? Yet you want to say that you couldn't afford to subsidize more of the gas prices? Yet you allow St. Lucia to be the highest in the OECS for gas prices? And you want to say to the people that you care? You want to say to the people of this country that you're the gouvernement Malawi? No, you're not. They have ripped our pockets. They have dug our hands deep into our pockets. And it is shameful. It's a total economic disgrace what they have done to the people of this country. And that's what we're arguing. Now we see that they have rushed now to reduce the price of gas. I think it came down 50 cents. We are still the highest in the OECS. The damage has already been done. He's already picked up millions in excise tax, and the political leader will go a bit more in detail in terms of that number. But what he was trying to say is that the government has not reached its target. That's not true. In these estimates, and I'll provide you, the members of the media, with a copy of the summary, we see that taxes went up by $123 million. It's in the government's own report. $123 million in new taxes But yet you allow gas to go up on the people. Yet you allow bread to go up on the people. Yet you allow cooking gas to go up on the people. You allow bus fares to go up on workers who have not seen a pay increase in a long time. When we speak to people, that's the problem, is that the cost of living is outpacing the price and salaries and wages. And so everybody else is doing badly except the government. That's what these numbers say. This is a big betrayal of vulnerable citizens in this country, and the Philip J. Pierre administration should not be patting themselves on the back. They should be ashamed of themselves for what they have done to all of us. This is a complete ripoff, and I am absolutely ashamed of what they have done for them. But yet they go to the parliament and they celebrate this nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. So I want to say that we will not allow them to compare the hard economic times that this economy faced during COVID to what they have to deal with. They have to come and show more compassion to the people and care less about breaking records as it relates to how much tax that they pick up. They're boasting now about tourism rebounding and the economic growth. You, the members of the media, will remember very well that the Alan Chastanet government was known or was painted to be crazy. I saw in Philip J. Pierre's own words that we were the only government that believed that that tourism can come back. And he said that we should not persist with the airport project. The Minister of Tourism, who is now celebrating all of the hard work that we have put in, because tourism is not an overnight business. You have to plan one season, your policies now, your marketing strategies now is going to expose the market to your destination. And so this is done way ahead of time. Now he's championing tourism when he said that we were going to bring COVID. He was the lead voice. We were bringing COVID to kill the people of St. Lucia. And we were seen as madmen to reopen the borders. But I am glad we didn't listen to any of them, because today St. Lucia would have been in a worse position. I'm very, very happy to see that the economy, after growing in the last year, fiscal year, by 12%, that there's another 12% growth. We celebrate that. But we also want to say clearly that the Labour Party administration cannot take any credit for the great economic performance. I challenge you, the members of the media, to name one policy, to name one project. Is it the airport? Is it the road projects that they say that the people don't eat the roads? Is it the Dyham Mall, which is under construction right now? Is it the cul-de-sac bridge that they can take credit for? Is it the West Coast Highway, which is already in train to happen? In fact, if they had not stopped all of these projects, I mean the Talvin Housing Project, the Shock Housing Project, the Rodney Bay Road, which many citizens of the country are now going through a significant inconvenience because of petty, cheap politics by this government. St. Jude's, the construction that was going on there, the airport project, the cruise ship terminal. Had they not stopped all of these projects, could you imagine how much better off we would have been today in economic performance? How much better off we would have been able to overcome the challenges posed in the country by a rather very difficult economic circumstance. There could be no comparison between COVID-19 and what this government is having to go through. We left a very solid foundation for the Philip J. Pierre administration, and they're now enjoying the benefits of our hard work. I now hand you over to our political leader.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Good morning, everyone. Just to maybe provide a little bit more detail as to what Dominic was making reference to. We've heard this government continuously say that there was going to be a significant revenue shortfall on the excise tax for fuel and the excise tax for cooking gas. So let's understand, cooking gas has always been subsidized by successive governments. It's nothing new. Nothing new. And governments have either, during times where the fuel price drops below a certain point, the price of oil on the market, either gained revenue or lost revenue. But the most egregious thing about what has happened is exactly what Dominic has said. A government that said that they inherited an economy that was broken and that was broke, and that they have to make all these sacrifices for the people because of our bad stewardship. The estimates have proven that wrong. So excise tax is charged on a basket of goods. And when you take that entire basket into consideration, yes, the excise tax on fuel is about $30 million short of where they had projected. Excise tax on cooking gas, yes, was about $14 million short of what they had projected. But all of the amount of excise tax collected together is in excess of $70 million of what they targeted. So you mean to tell me that seeing those trends, that the government would not have made the decision to have kept the price of gas at the pump lower, would not have allowed cooking gas to be lower? Why? Because the price of fuel went up, the bus fares went up. Because people are paying almost twice as much for cooking gas, disposable income at the household level has been diminished. Because this government did not understand that the CIF price, cost, insurance, and freight of goods coming into St. Lucia were going up because of inflation, and as a result of it, by keeping the import tax at the same level, that the government would get a windfall, which is exactly what has happened. Instead, what should they have done? Lowered the dutiable rates, so that the impact of inflation would have been cushioned, which would have helped people in their households and helped the productive sector. But the damage has now been done. Do any of us expect bus fares to go back down? Do any of us expect bread prices to go back down? So we've built now inflation into our system. And rightfully so, the workers of this country are demanding higher wages to compensate for what has taken place. And when those wages go up, do we believe that those wages are going to come back down? No, they're not. Now, what makes this more egregious is this is a government that purports to be what? A socialist government, concerned about the people. But none of their policies support that they are. Now, if persons were not upset enough, what else has the budget revealed to us? The budget has revealed that consultancy fees have gone up by $122 million. A person like a Silas Wilson, we all know who he is. We all know who he's affiliated to, would be hired as a consultant at St. Jude's. What has happened in St. Jude's for the last 2 years that requires you to bring a person like him in and paying him thousands of dollars? The number of people that have been hired from this fraternity, the media fraternity, as consultants in prime minister's offices and all the other offices. How many of them? How many of them? Now, how does that calculate into the rhetoric, the statements that things are so bad, but you're hiring all these people? $122 million in new consultancy fees. We've seen that entertainment allocations have gone up. Now, I'm just saying to you that if in fact you want to say that things are so bad, let's not listen to the numbers, but listen to the rhetoric. Where was the sacrifice on government's part to have supported a position not to have reduced the amount of duties, reduced and subsidized some of the core consumption items for the people in this country. It's not there. We brought up how Taiwanese money is being used. Taiwanese money that's supposed to be going into the development of this country. $1 million was allocated to fix up the U.S. ambassador's, the St. Lucia ambassador's home in Washington, D.C. Who is that person? That is the General Secretary's wife, Leo Clark's wife, back in Washington, D.C. While people are suffering in St. Lucia, we're going to fix up her home in Washington, D.C. And we're going to take Taiwanese monies to do that. That tells you the level of priorities that this government has. Everybody else is supposed to make sacrifices. The people are supposed to make sacrifices. But they and their comrades are not making any sacrifices. None. And all of this is here. You have a minister of sports that is spending more time traveling all over the world. And yet when you go through his book and you look at the performance of his ministry, it's blank. No achievements. None for a whole year. And you want to come to the house and spend over an hour and a half trying to fool the people of Grosley that you're doing something for them? What? Look at the state of the Rodney Bay Road. And I want to say, the T-Village project, he's right. There was applications in for planning, but when the site was being developed, it encroached its neighbor's land. Who is the neighbor? Wasco, you know.
The government.
Wasco.
The government encroaching his own.
And I want to ask him, is he against the T-Village project? An opportunity to take prime land, subdivide it, put all of the support services in to help what? The same small business people? And to raise up the standard in Grosley? Now, I also want to deal with a very, very important issue. First of all, I want to say that what has taken place at Banans and the defense that the current government is trying to provide is such an indictment against the integrity and the morality of this government. You're going to tell me that you're going to take a prime piece of land, 100,000 square feet. Did you put it out to tender? Did National Housing put it out to tender? No. Did National Housing contemplate that to get a proper market value for that property? And one can argue, because there was an evaluation done in 2013 that said the land was worth $70 a square foot. They redid an evaluation to say that in 10 years it had reduced by half. Now what a joke. You yourself have seen the development in Port Castries, and you're now about to spend $40 million on expanding Port Castries. How much more value is that going to create on the land? Means that that's the last piece of land on the waterfront that's available for development. The last piece. I pointed out that National Housing owed or owes NIC $34 million. Okay, and that money was owed to them for the construction of the new CDC buildings. That's how long that this has been outstanding. But understand the ripple effect. So that means that NIC has $34 million of a non-performing asset or non-performing loan on its books, which it needs to cater for. National Housing has a debt of $34 million, which is in its books, which would affect the ability of National Housing to borrow money. And then, how did it come into the estimates? It came into the estimates because there is a contingent liability for the $34 million. Meaning what in English? It means that the government of St. Lucia had to guarantee the loan for housing. And because housing has not been paying the loan, that the government now has to include it in its debt. So the debt of St. Lucia, the national debt of St. Lucia, has been increased by $34 million because of that loan. So if in fact housing had decided to sell that piece of land to NIC, that means that NIC would have taken the land in lieu of the loan for $34 million. So NIC now can take that loan off its books and it has an asset to replace it. National Housing would have benefited because it means that their books, their asset value, would have increased by $34 million because they no longer have a payable of $34 million. And the government of St. Lucia would have benefited because now we can reduce our national debt by $34 million. The next thing is that a known entity called NIC, does everybody know who NIC is? Does everybody know what NIC does? Has NIC not built buildings? NIC has a track record. We know who they are. We know what their track record in business is. So if NIC had taken over the land, could we not see that NIC has the capacity? Do we know who they are and don't we trust the capacity to have developed the land? And because NIC works closely with the government, we would have known that NIC would have supported any project that government of St. Lucia had supported. And ultimately, all the persons who are depending on NIC for their pension, that they would have an asset that would be now a performing asset to improve the viability of NIC. Win, 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 win situation. No. You go and revalue the land and you sell it at less than the value, $25 a square foot. Now, there's some things that we suspected, because I have to say to you that anything that Richard Federick says, I don't believe. There's not a time in which he is given information that I believe him to be correct. So when he said that he had offered the land to SLASPA, I think like most St. Lucians, I didn't believe that. Because why would SLASPA not have bought that land for $2.5 million? Why? Why would they have not borrowed the land for $2.5 million? But the reality is, Richard came to the House and he said in Parliament that he offered the land to SLASPA. And two ministers in Parliament who represent SLASPA said nothing. The Prime Minister is the Minister of Finance, and he oversees SLASPA. And the Minister of Infrastructure is also the Minister of SLASPA. And he said nothing. So I have to believe that Richard may be right in this occasion. That he did offer it to them. And they didn't see fit to buy it for $2.5 million. Because if National Housing may have needed the cash for whatever reason, why wouldn't they have bought that valuable land for $2.5 million? And if SLASPA didn't want to buy it, and it was discussed at Cabinet, then I have to also believe that the Minister of Investment, who is also the district rep for where the lands are, also declined to buy it. And it begs the question, why? Why would they have declined to buy it? Because even if it was under market value, if they had sold it either to Invest St. Lucia or to SLASPA, I think I would not have an issue. But you now go, you don't tender it, and all of a sudden we hear, after the fact, this land was sold in October. There's been no press conference. Nothing. We are now told that the land has been sold, and it's been sold to this lady. I want to ask y'all, who is she? What do you all know about her? Have you heard about her doing developments? Remember, she's bought it in her own personal capacity, not as a business. If any St. Lucian has to go to invest St. Lucia today to buy a piece of land in Viewfort or wherever Invest St. Lucia owns land, you are required to provide a plan. And so much so that the plan has to get pre-planning approval on the physical side of it. What's the plan? What is she going to do with the project? This is a continuation where we've had a situation of Rovergate, facts of what Ernest did when he was the High Commissioner. That he lied to the British government using St. Lucia's name to buy a car and to help his brother get a car duty-free in the UK. Where he put a car in the name of the state's name, and up to today cannot explain how it came out of the state's name. A situation in which an account was opened up in the UK in the name of the St. Lucia. But the Auditor General, not me, the Auditor General confirmed that that permission to open up that account was never given. Nobody had been notified that money had been transferred into that account. And Labour Party wants to know why they have problems. You have a minister in government who lost his US visa. You made claims that the person, when he lost his visa, he's not fit to be in office. You have now found yourselves and put him in as a minister. Have they come to any one of us? Have they come to the media to explain what new revelation they have on Richard as to why all of a sudden the change of heart? Why? Now, I want to say that I, Alan Chastanet, I'm a St. Lucian. My family has been here for more than 4 generations. My wife's family has been here for multiple generations. My children grew up in St. Lucia, for the most part. I've worked in St. Lucia. I started playing national basketball here in St. Lucia. I worked in government. I've worked as the director of tourism. I've worked as the minister of tourism. I've worked as the prime minister. I've invested in St. Lucia. My family have invested in St. Lucia. So this idea as to how we're going to define who is St. Lucian. Who? Who's St. Lucian?
We're all St. Lucians. Black, white, yellow.
And if I am a St. Lucian, and I take great pride in being a St. Lucian, what I will not do is demean St. Lucians. And every opportunity that I've had to promote St. Lucia and to promote St. Lucians, I believe that my action speaks loudly. Loudly. And even more importantly, when we are successful on the international stage. And the reason I got into politics was to make sure that more St. Lucians are given the opportunity to fulfill their dreams and their aspirations. Because I've said, when a young person's life is wasted, you can be selfish and say, well, that person wasted their life. But we never know what that person would have become and what they would have done in promoting St. Lucia. And that's why persons like Julian Alfred, I salute my hat to her so high, because I know where she came from. I know what she had to go through. And today, she's promoting St. Lucia at the highest level. Now, when I hear the Labour Party wanting now to question who is St. Lucian by the color of their skin, racism, by religion, and whether in fact that they came from a particular economic sector of our society, according to them, born with a golden spoon in their mouths. I mean, here it is that Philip Pierre, he may not appreciate it, but he came from a good middle-class family. Both his parents were employed. One was a teacher, one was a policeman. And he benefited personally because he got to go to university. And he's now become Prime Minister of this country. And that is a good thing. His daughter is benefiting today. She got a job in government. Was that job put out to tender? Do we know? I don't begrudge her if she has the capability. But she now has come from a golden spoon in her mouth. Does that make her less St. Lucian? No. There are many people who are not black in this country who are St. Lucian. They're mulatto. They're red skin. They're light skin like me. There are St. Lucians who don't speak Creole, like me. Does that make them less St. Lucian because they don't speak Creole? So I want to say to St. Lucians that you cannot fall for the politics of Labour Party. That every time that Alan Chastanet or United Workers' Party brings up policy issues, the issue of bananas, the issue of the excise tax, the issue of the canine dogs, the issue of security in this country, the issue of how to handle inflation, the issue in terms of tourism development, that you cannot go back to racism. Because that's what it is. It's blatant racism on their part. And I will have nothing to do with that. I'm not going to be compromised for 1 second in saying what I believe needs to be said, in promoting good policies for this country, and for those policies to be interpreted in any way as being demeaning to St. Lucians. I have worked too hard. I have committed myself for too long. My family has remained committed to St. Lucia and shall always remain committed to St. Lucia. Who is more St. Lucian or less St. Lucian than my father? What more does he have to prove than anybody else? Now, am I saying that I'm better or my family is better than anybody else in St. Lucia? No. But I am saying I'm St. Lucian. And to want to interpret anything I've said to be demeaning, and we can go through a litany of things over the last 5 years that the Labour Party has attributed to me, to say, oh, I'm being demeaning to St. Lucians. Right? And to suggest that because of the color of my skin and my accent, that all of a sudden that I'm trying to demean St. Lucians. I'm asking St. Lucians not to fall for that nonsense. Do not fall for that nonsense. The reality is, the latest example is bananas. The government has many questions to answer. Why was it not put out to tender? Why was that person chosen? What was the track record of that person? Is that person even genuinely the owner of the land? Do we believe that that person had $2.5 million to go and buy the land? Do we believe that person has access to more money? And if in fact that it's true that the beneficial owner, meaning the real owner, is Reno Gujata, why wouldn't you put Reno's name on the purchase of the land in the first place? Why was the land sold for $2.5 million? Why is everybody so silent? Where is the chairman of National Housing, Mikey Pilgrim? I think his nickname used to be Mr. Clean. Well, he needs to come clean and tell the people of St. Lucia why the land was sold. John Peters, a man who always has something to say, always has an opinion on something. Mumu Pills has nothing to say now. He cannot justify why the property was sold for $2.5 million. He cannot justify, in his own words, why it was not put out to tender. He cannot justify why it was sold to the person it was sold to. He cannot tell us where the land is going to be developed and give us all the assurances to know that this thing was up and right. We need to hear their voices. And if we don't hear their voices, they're either one of two things. They're colluding with this government in what I see as a great act of corruption. Because if you sell a piece of land for $2.5 million, and we believe that that land is worth at minimum 7, if not much more than that, why when the easiest thing would have been to have sold it to NIC? If you're not going to give it to a person who has a track record, a person who has some business acumen, some person that gives us confidence. Oh, okay, that person's taken over. I know that person's going to develop the property. Who is this person? What track record does this person have? Now, when I say those things, in no way am I questioning the character of that person. And never have I questioned the character of that person. What I've questioned is the ability of that person to take a prime asset of St. Lucia and to develop it. So I want to reiterate, I am a St. Lucian. I'm a proud St. Lucian. And I'm not going to allow, of all people, the Labour Party to try to question my intentions. I think that my track record in this country, my family's track record in this country, speaks volumes. Speaks volumes. And I will continue to apply every ounce of energy I have in making St. Lucia a better place for us to live, a better place for us to work, the best place in the world for people to come and visit, and the best place in the world for people to come and invest. That's what I'm going to push every single day. And I want that my actions be judged on that. Not on the color of my skin, not on the sound of my accent, not whether I speak Creole. I mean, the Prime Minister in the House, they're bringing up about whether I really have my degrees. Really? A grown man like that? But that's the level that the conversation has come to. That tells me how desperate that they are, because they cannot argue the points on what the policies are. As Dominic said, they cannot point to any project right now. Cabot, they went against Cabot.
Yeah.
And today now I see their same people going there and seeing how beautiful Cabot is and what Cabot's going to bring. The same Daher Mall. I mean, can you imagine the Speaker of the House trying to say that the development agreement was signed before the deed of sale? But of course, you would sit down with the people that you're going to agree to work out the deals before the deed of sale comes, after you have an agreement. And if in fact the development agreement is embedded, meaning it's part of the deed of sale, and it says the conditions of the sale, you want to now all of a sudden say that that's not admissible? Look, that's the same person that advised himself that cost the people of this country $150,000. That's how much respect I have for his interpretation of what took place in the House. Nonsense. Let us discuss policy. When you hear a government that said, oh, the canine dogs were too expensive, and then want to now come out and tell you about scanners, and the scanners were not working, but we're going to try to bring the dogs back. And when they had the canine dogs, we said the canine dogs are mobile. Scanners are not mobile. It's not like you have one or the other. You need both. Both. And I'm confused as to whether they really believe that people are believing these stories. But this government has lost its way. It cannot point to anything that it's done to grow this economy and the success they're having today. And what's sad is that with the success that they've had, that they have not done everything they possibly can to have benefited and protected the more vulnerable people in this society and continue to allow St. Lucia to be competitive on a global market. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Political Leader. Thank you, members of the media. This is where we open up the floor for a few questions. We really want to stick to the budget as much as we can in your line of questioning. We will make ourselves available at any time. You know, we're accessible to you guys for any other sidebar issues that you may have that's there reverberating in your spirit. But today we want to keep the questioning as much as we can to the budget, to the general economic situation in the country, which is afflicting many, many, many citizens in this country. the price of gas, the price of bread, the price of bus fares, the wages that are not going up. That seems to be the recurring complaint that we get from the general citizens, that wages are not keeping a pace to the cost of living. Anyway, we open the floor to you. Who wants to go first? You good? Yeah? I see we have some students in the room as well from Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Yeah? No? He's just wearing the uniform? Oh, one student. That's welcome, sir. We hope that you enjoyed your time with us. I think, Mr. Political Leader, we were so comprehensive that we preempted all the questions that the media would have had. And so today, they really have no questions. So I want to thank you.
Let me just say this
Sure.
to the media. That we have our convention coming up on the 16th, which will be followed by a public meeting, which will be the first public meeting that we're going to have since the elections. And there are a lot of things to discuss. I think that probably the person's presentation that has invoked the greatest amount of conversation was the former Prime Minister Kenny Anthony's speech. It was interesting to note with his ideas on a Prime Minister being able to commit himself to a person to make him a minister. Now, I don't know if he was making a reference to the decision to bring Richard Federick and Stephenson King into the House. I would hope that he would provide some clarity on that in the future. But I would say to you that Dr. Anthony's reflection on his own past, which is kind of what I see taking place here, and Vieux-Fort in particular, speaks volumes about the difference between United Workers' Party and the Labour Party. For anyone to suggest that $3.5 to $5 million can solve the problem in Vieux-Fort has to be delusional. And I think that speaks to why Vieux-Fort has found itself. I'm now absolutely convinced the Labour Party is not able to see a bigger picture, cannot figure out how to intertwine, link the economy and social progress in this country. So when you want to talk about how do you solve the problems in Vieux-Fort, you think some paint and cleaning up the place is going to solve that problem? Even to finalize the lands, to rationalize the lands in Bruceville, takes a lot of money. That doesn't happen. As I said, roads, sewage, and now you have people squatting on smaller lots than 5,000. Our own standards in our planning create problems, and we need to find new solutions. So remember, this is a government that when we were pushing DSH, and we use the word DSH, but we don't break it down. Horse racing track, casino, apartment developments, shopping mall, hotels, university, and residential area. That's just at the Beau-Saint-Just site. Then you had the Il Pirata site, which was going to be a home port terminal with retail and residential and commercial space. And then you had what we were going to do at Sandy Beach in terms of subdividing the land to create a tourism park, to create an opportunity for St. Lucians to buy a piece of beachfront land and smaller property. So even a more successful model than what's taken place at Rodney Bay. An international airport. A hospital that was not just for domestic use, but an international hospital to encourage more investment into the Vieux-Fort area. Water, road developments. The call centers. Right? Ojo Labs came in. I mean, when I hear this government continue to want to question Ojo Labs, really, young people making $3,500 a month, some of them making as much as $7,500 a month, and being involved in the most cutting-edge industry in the world. And what? The government of St. Lucia, through our NAP program, paid $1,000 a month for the first set of employees, and then $500 a month for the next year. So you're talking about $2,000 per employee for some people now who've been employed as long as 6 years getting $3,500 or $7,500, you don't think that that's a good investment? And you want to make it out to be anything less than that? But the development of the call center market in Vieux Fort and understanding the impact that Vieux Fort city town has on Laborie, Choiseul, and the two Micos and going down to Dennery? Are you kidding me that this government, and particularly Alva Baptist, Musa, and Kenny, have not stood up in cabinet to demand that the cruise ship port be built in Vieux Fort? I mean, the same man who wants to talk about how the port is empty, to know that cargo may not be the way to go moving forward, but certainly cruise ships. Somebody has to explain to you why diversifying away from Castries in the cruise ship market and allowing that to go into Vieux Fort is a good thing. How many taxi drivers are only depending on what? Carrying people from Vieux Fort up north. Now all of a sudden you're going to be selling tours, you're going to be having a duty-free shopping, you're going to create activity, you're going to have, because it's a home port, you're now going to have pre and post. Because it's a home port, all of those home port passengers are going to pay the airport tax. The economic impact of home porting is second to none. And you can bring that investment into Vieux Fort. It would have a significant impact, not only on the Vieux Fort area, but Micos and Laborie and Choiseul. You can't even start thinking of that. I mean, in our own constituency in Mico, we were thinking of that. That when cruise ship passengers come in Vieux Fort, they can go all the way up to a place called Dewash in Soufrière and take a zip line to Cartier in my constituency, and the road that we developed all the way through Deriso can carry people all the way back to the hotel. And you open up the opportunity of these countries. But you think that $3.5 to $5 million is going to resolve the problem? It was so gratifying to see young people lining up to go and deposit money in a bank instead of killing each other. And you give people hope. And I keep on saying this, if we want to beat gangs in this country, we cannot do it by the law. We have to give the young people of this country an alternative that they can see that they can own a home, they can travel, they can raise families on. Once we prove that to them, that is when it's going to happen. And as successful as we've been in taking the GDP of this country, which when we came into government was at 4.8 billion and is now at 5.5 billion, Dominic said the most important thing. If the airport had continued, if DSH had continued, if the cruise and home port facility had continued, if Sabasha was off the ground, if we supported Cabot, if we continued to build roads, if we continued the housing projects, where would this country be today? That is what we have lost. And do not allow the Labour Party to demean anybody in United Workers' Party, and in particular me, on the basis of racism. Because if we allow them to do that, many more St. Lucians will fall into that category. Because I want for them to define who is a St. Lucian. Who is a St. Lucian? And there's a very important program coming up, which is, who am I? That's what we have to focus on. We have to focus on the self-esteem of St. Lucians. And you do not succeed by demeaning St. Lucians. And that's why I stood up for the video that went around. Because it was demeaning of St. Lucians. The photograph that was taken with me with two young kids and putting them in shackles, that is demeaning to us as St. Lucians. It's very harmful to the two kids, but even more to us as the character of who we are. So thank you for today.
Thank you very, very much, members of the media. I'm not going to forget you on Facebook that have tuned in and braved this last hour or so. Thank you very, very much, everybody, for tuning in and for listening to us. Thank you for your support, as usual. And I want to welcome the student from Sir Arthur Lewis. I suspect that he's in the communications department, doing his internship with one of the local media houses here. I thank you very, very much for being here.